This is a Bosch MIC 612, and I have installed one on my townhouse. The Bosch MIC 612 is not a camera that you would expect to see guarding someone's house. This is more for industrial or military type uses. And one of the reasons for that is that it's a thermal camera. Now that does not mean that it has night vision. That means it actually sees heat. So don't think goggles, think Call of Duty AC-130 mission. That means that basically in the middle of the night, if there's absolutely no light, it can still identify heat sources. That could be cars, that could be people, but it can see things in the dead of night. Now, there was a lot that went into setting this up. And first, let me start with the hardware side. We started with 3D printing some things that we needed to mount the camera. Now, I am not amazing at designing things to be printed. I can get away with it, I can do it, and I love doing it. But my brother is actually very skilled in CAD, and he made these L brackets that we used to actually stiffen the rail that we mounted it to, and then this little device that the camera actually sits on. So the software side is a little bit more involved, and it's done with something called Python, which is something you probably have heard of, and Flask, which maybe you haven't. So the Python program takes the input from the camera, the video, that is, and Flask allows it to be a web server. So from here, he made an HTML web page that shows the video and has some buttons to actually control the camera. And there is out-of-the-box software for this camera, but this gives us a lot of functionality, one of them being that you can actually pull this up from any computer in your house. Now, I actually built upon this, and I added some functionality. One was the ability for it to delete the recordings that the camera does. I did that actually a while back. And another one was the arrow keys. Normally his application just has buttons, click buttons to control. I didn't really like that, so I added the ability to how to hold down the control key and move the camera around using those keys. So beyond that, I created what's called a container for it. And let me explain what that is. There's something out there called Electron, and even though you may not have heard of it, you've probably used applications that use it. So if you've used Discord, what you're really using is a web application, and it looks like a native Windows or Mac application. And the way that this works is using Electron. Electron allows me to write a simple program with the page that I'm going to be using, and it pulls that page into this container, that we call it, and it looks from there like a normal Windows program. It even has a .exe file. So you run this .exe file, it opens up a window and shows what's on the web page. This is really awesome for developers because we can write our web application and then simply create a container for each different type of platform. One for Windows, one for Mac, maybe one for Android, and everything that we do aside from the container itself can all be done in one place. Now this gives me an advantage with performance because trying to run this in the browser has a kind of a hurt on the performance. The container is much simpler than, say, Chrome is, so it's actually pretty easy. Now guys, this thing is really cool. It swivels, it pivots, and it looks really neat. And beyond that, the thermal camera itself is probably something that most homeowners can't say that they own. This can see things like cars at night by the heat that they set off. And I'll notice things like the engine and tires are particularly hot. It can also see people because people actually generate some heat. And so this means if it's completely pitch black outside, I can still see that person. Now, I'm not trying to use it to spy on anyone here. This is mostly just something to watch over my house, and it does have a little programmable tour I can put into it and have it automatically look in certain places in certain times. But beyond all that, it's a really cool programming project. It's something that is just fun to work on because it's something that not everybody has the ability to do. If you just have this camera and you use the out-of-the-box software, there are certainly things that you can do with it. But if you know how to program, then you can do a lot more. And the ability for us to 3D print things also allowed us to put it together in a way that looks really good. So I'm going to be playing around with this. There's a lot of issues ahead. One is reliability. I have this hooked to a Raspberry Pi 4, the 8GB version, but I'm having some issues with that machine being reliable. It seems like every once in a while it just gives up in one way or another. So I'm actually working right now on seeing if I can make this run directly on Windows, and perhaps one of my Windows machines would perform slightly better. Beyond that, I'd like to add some features. One thing that my brother delved into was actually having the camera be able to recognize different types of objects. That would be, well, objects like humans or, animals like dogs. And it was using a machine learning algorithm to do that. Now, the issue that was run into there is that you need sort of a powerful machine to run this type of thing, and none of us are really in the position to take our main gaming rigs and devote it to this purpose. But there's a lot that can be done with it. One thing I was considering was possibly using an Xbox controller with it, instead of using the arrow keys on the keyboard. This would just make it a little bit easier to control. Another thing I'd like to see if I can improve with it is the latency, because when I push the button to move it, it takes almost a solid second to start moving. Now, it's still usable this way, but it would be a lot better if I could just move it almost instantaneously. Beyond that, there are just a lot of cool things that can be done with something like this. And when I know how to program, and if you know how to program, that just opens this door for you that allows you to start customizing things like this. This thing comes with a manual. The manual talks about kind of the inputs it expects and the output it gives. And beyond that, we can just write programs to make it do whatever we want. So you may see some updates on this in the future. I hope you think this is cool. Have a good night.